Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and today we're going beyond the civil rights movement into the 1960s to 80s, which ushered in huge political shifts in America. And our political movements all changed to react to these new paradigms established by large political shifts. But just like all of American history, socialists were there pushing things forward even as history itself began to end. The 1960s brought a renewed interest in anarchism, with groups like the community anarchist Diggers being one of the most influential. This theater troupe's lifestyle and philosophy blended a desire for freedom with a consciousness of the community in which they lived. The Diggers' central tenet was to be authentic, seeking to create a society free from the dictates of money and capitalism. They would inspire and influence other groups like Abbie Hoffman's Yippies. The Diggers opened free stores in which they simply gave away their stock, provided free food, distributed free drugs, gave away money, organized free music concerts, and performed works of political art, much like the original English Diggers who had promulgated a vision of society free from buying, selling, and private property back in the 17th century. On the other hand, the Yippies employed theatrical gestures, such as running Pegasus the Immortal as a candidate for president in 1968 to mock the status quo. They've been described as highly theatrical, anti-authoritarian, and anarchist youth movement of symbolic politics. Since they were well known for their street theater and politically themed pranks, many of the older political left simply ignored or denounced them. According to the ABC News, the group was known for street theater pranks and was once referred to as the Groucho Marxists. Murray Bookchin was an anarchist and pioneer in the environmentalist movement who would go on to create his own philosophy of communalism, which sought to bridge the gap between Marxism and anarchism. He was known for being a prominent anti-capitalist and advocate of social decentralization along ecological and democratic lines. His ideas have influenced social movements since the 60s, including the New Left, the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-globalization movement, Occupy Wall Street, and more recently, the Democratic Confederalism of Rojava. He was a central figure in the American Green Movement and the Burlington Greens. Angela Davis is an American political activist, communist, feminist, and author. Early in the course of her activism, a police officer was shot with a gun that she had purchased. And with that evidence alone, the US government would hunt her across the country as a radical terrorist, catching up with her in New York City. Over 2 years later, she would be acquitted after a long public campaign to pay her bail and see her freed and released from charges. At her trial, even an all-white jury couldn't think of a reason to put her behind bars again. She'd been an accomplished speaker, lecturer, prolific writer, and two-time vice presidential nominee of the Communist Party of America. Davis was a major figure in the prison abolition movement and is vocally opposed to the death penalty. She has referred to the United States prison system as the prison industrial complex, and was one of the founders of Critical Resistance, a national grassroots organization dedicated to building a movement to abolish the prison system. In recent work, she has argued that the U.S. prison system resembles a new form of slavery, pointing to the disproportionate share of African American population who are incarcerated. Davis advocates focusing social efforts on education and building engaged communities to solve various social problems now handled through state punishment. Cesar Chavez was a labor leader, community organizer, businessman, and Latinx civil rights activist who, along with Dolores Huerta, co-founded the National Farm Workers Association, which later merged with the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee to become the United Farm Workers Labor Union. By now, I hope you get the point that perhaps the best way to become a notable socialist is to unionize your workplace. Because it worked for Chavez. He established a remote commune in Keene, California as well. Today, he's an icon for organized labor and leftist groups in the US and a folk saint among Mexican-American laborers. Michael Harrington is a writer and author of The Other America, political activist, political theorist, and professor of political science. In 1982, he founded the Democratic Socialists of America. He co-chaired the organization with socialist feminist author Barbara Ehrenreich, who is best known for her 2001 book, Nickeled and Dimed, on Not Getting By in America. A memoir of her 3-month experiment surviving on minimum wage as a waitress, hotel maid, house cleaner, nursing home aide, and finally a Walmart clerk. The Democratic Socialists of America isn't a political party per se. The DSA does not run candidates on their own ballot line in elections, but instead fight for reforms today that will weaken the power of corporations and increase the power of working people. They follow more closely in the tradition of the Socialist Party of America, of social democracy to democratic socialism, even though their party was initially founded to counteract the Social Democrats USA from absorbing the crumbling Socialist Party of America. It would take a while for the DSA to rise in popularity, but today the DSA is the largest socialist organization in the United States. Their position on American electoral politics states that Democratic Socialists reject an either-or approach to electoral coalition building, focused solely on either a new party or a realignment within the Democratic Party. As of November 2020, membership grew to more than 85,000 and the number of local chapters was 181. This swell was due in part to the popularity of two DSA members, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib, who were elected to the House of Representatives as Democrats in November of 2018. 11 more members of the DSA were elected to state legislatures at the same time. In November 2020, Ocasio-Cortez and Tlaib were re-elected to the House and were joined by two more DSA members, Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, who had also been seated as Democrats. Michael Moore is an American documentary filmmaker, author, and activist. His work frequently addresses the topics of climate, globalization, capitalism, and quite often they take a candid look at the big picture of American life. Like Upton Sinclair and Barbara Ironreach before him, his journalistic style is perhaps best described as muckraking, as his documentaries often get down and dirty in the gritty underbelly of American life and culture. Although Moore has been known for his political activism, he rejects the label of activist as redundant in a democracy. I and you and everyone else has to be a political activist. If we're not politically active, it ceases to be a democracy. According to John Fleischer of the Associated Press, Moore is known for his fiery left-wing populism, and publications such as the Socialist Worker Online have hailed him as the new Tom Paine. He would be a vocal supporter of Bernie Sanders in 2016 and then again in 2020. Speaking of Bernie Sanders, it's hard to imagine anyone more influential in a modern American socialism than Bernie. But in 2020, he wasn't alone in running as a socialist for a position in the White House. FDR leaving office in the beginning of the Cold War began to lead the Democrats to distancing themselves from avowed socialists like they had in the New Deal era. Going into the new millennium, socialists had lost their place in both the Republican and Democratic Party, with both now being decidedly capitalist parties. Bernie first, and then the Squad would lead a small faction of socialists from the DSA into the Democratic Party, but the party as a whole is hardly our allies, as evidenced by how they try to primary any successful Democratic Party socialists after they win. Because of this, a lot of socialists who were running for president in 2020 are third-party candidates that you might not have heard about. Howie Hawkins is a favorite of many Bernie fans who were sad to see him concede in the primary, but considering his long track record of political activisms, it's sad to see that so much of this popularity in 2020 is attributable to the circumstances of this and not his merit in history. Hawkins is a retired Teamster and construction worker who has played leading roles in anti-war, anti-nuclear, and pro-worker movements since the 1960s. He co-founded the Green Party of the United States in 2001 with a vision of eco-socialism inspired by the philosophy of people like Murray Bookchin, whom he founded the Left Green Network with in 1988. As of 1993, Hawkins favored anarcho-communism as well as libertarian municipalism as the best way of integrating workers' control and community control into the process of social change that ultimately leads to a marketless, moneyless, stateless, cooperative commonwealth. Hawkins disagrees with the party-within-the-party approach to the Democratic Party advocated by organizations such as the Democratic Socialists of America or by individuals such as Bernie Sanders. Instead, he believes that socialists should create their own independent left-wing party. As one of the leading eco-socialists in electoral politics, Hawkins became the first politician to include the Green New Deal in their election platform when he ran for governor of New York in 2010. Currently, Hawkins supports the Green Party's version of the Green New Deal that would serve as a transition plan to a 100% clean, renewable energy system by 2030, utilizing a carbon tax, job guarantees, free college, single-payer healthcare, and a focus on using public programs. That said, after running for office 25 times and winning none, his impact on electoral politics comes more from the ideas that he brings into the national conversation and the movements and parties he's led than from any individual electoral success. In 2020, Hawkins was supported in his run by his vice presidential candidate, Angela Walker. As an activist, driver, and labor organizer, she had previously ran as the presidential nominee of the Socialist Party USA in 2016. In 2020, SPUSA and the Greens would combine forces to try to take on the monumental task of running against Trump. However, the combo would end up winning less votes than the 2016 Green Party candidate Jill Stein. Walker was the second African-American vice presidential candidate run by the Green Party and the first female African-American presidential candidate announced in the 2020 race. Walker became a local director of a chapter of the Amalgamated Transit Union. She would step down from the position in 2013, shortly before running against incumbent Democrat and Fox News pundit David A. Clark Jr. During her campaign for sheriff in Milwaukee, Walker called for an end to mass incarceration, evictions, and anti-immigrant policing. She received approximately 20% of the vote. Gloria DeRiva ran as a presidential candidate for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, as well as the Peace and Freedom Party. She had run as a presidential nominee of both of those parties in 2016 as well, but then with a different running mate for each party. Further back, she'd run for the president in the PSL in 2008 as well. While she didn't get a ton of votes in 2020, she did get more than Kanye West, and I guess that's something. Mike Gravel had the distinction of being the leftmost candidate running in the Democratic primary, even though his run was completely ignored by the mainstream media. His intention in running wasn't to win, though. Instead, he wanted to use the platform of a nominee to ask hard questions that might pull the rhetoric of the other candidates to the left. It's hard to say if he was effective in this, but he did get an interesting sort of grassroots movement from the experience. Primarily funded by the youngest demographic, his support, while small, was youthful, and the campaign managed to morph into popular media creation platforms similar in function to a left-wing version of PragerU.
Hi, this is H. John Benjamin. I'm here to talk to you about a big problem on the internet. It's called people emailing my wife. No, it's called PragerU. Imagine a huge stream of lies that pours into every computer in America. Imagine it's disguised to look unbiased and packaged into slick videos. And imagine oil billionaires give them tens of millions each year to indoctrinate your friends, your family. Well, that's PragerU.
Launched in September 2020, the new entity said it would carry on the life's work of former U.S. Senator Mike Gravel in fighting for global peace and democracy. Its mission is to promote bold and forward-thinking ideas about a more peaceful and egalitarian world, and to build a robust movement of young people to win it. As a Democratic senator of 12 years from 1969 to 1981 for the state of Alaska, Gravel became nationally known for his forceful but unsuccessful attempts to end the draft during the war in Vietnam, and for putting the Pentagon Papers into the public record in 1971 at some great risk to himself. In the early 2000s, Gravel proposed the National Initiative, a national-level effort for direct democracy in elections alongside the Democracy Foundation. And then, finally, there's Bernie Sanders. But to cover his long and active history in American politics, I'm definitely going to need at least another video. See you then. If you are still watching the video at this point, I'd like to take the time to ask you to check out the following channels, which, like my own, have not reached 1,000 subscribers yet. And if you're not subscribed to this channel, hit that button, ring that bell, do the YouTube stuff. And in an effort to keep this channel ad-free into the future, I would also ask that if you appreciate the content I'm putting out here, that you could go over to my Patreon, or even for a one-time donation, my Ko-fi page, and send me a little bit of money to help me make ends meet in a year that has been troubling the hell out of everyone.